All right, welcome back, everyone. We're working on our Unity game, and what I want to do is add on the next feature a jumping mechanic. So let me show you. When you're on a platform and you hit space, you should be able to jump. But you should not be able to jump when you're not on the platform. You hear me clicking and nothing's happening? So let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you the code for how we do it. A couple things I want you to know ahead of time is in order for all of this to work, you're going to need a box collider on everything, which is already done for you. But in case you create objects later a different way, in order for all these to work, you need box colliders on all your platforms as well as on your player. The other thing is this all is working with all of our platforms being on the platform layer where we know what number our platform happens to be, which is the number 8. We're going to need to know that as well. So let's go ahead and open our code from last time and let's get that working. Okay, so I have opened up the player controller script and I have a list of some to-do items. Number 1, directly in the class, right after we open up the class, before we have any methods, our first to-do item are to add our materials. We're going to create some variables that we're going to use to do the jumping mechanic. After that, in start, what we need to do is we need to connect to our collider, and we need to get the radius of the collider, and you'll see why a little bit later. And then we go to our fixed update method, and we're going to add a jumping mechanic, which is going to give us a couple things to do. First of all, we want to check to see if the space bar is being pressed. If it is, we'll go ahead and jump. And then the other thing we're going to check for, sort of the second half of the video, is we're going to be looking at to see that we're touching the platform before we can jump. We're going to add that second, so we're going to kind of do a two-part video in this video. And then finally, the last thing we need to do is write a method that's going to check to see if we're grounded or not. And so those are the items we're going to work on. So let's go ahead and create our variables that are going to give us our material. Okay, so our first item we want to add here is basically a jump height. So we're going to create a float here, a floof, and it's going to be jump height. We're going to set this to begin with at, we'll set it at 300, and you'll see what that does. 0.0, because it's a floating point, and a capital F for float. All right, so we're going to create a jump height. All right, we're going to do collider in a little bit. I'm going to skip that for now. Let's just get a simple jumping mechanic working. So we're going to go over the jumping mechanic. Check to see if the space bar is being pressed and that we're touching the platform before jumping. I'm going to do the first part here. So we're going to start with an if. It always begins with an if. We're going to check something. We start with an if or an else if. And so what are we checking for? We're checking to see if the space bar is being pressed. So in order to do that, we create input. Okay, so input is going to get the input from the player. And this form of input is getting a key. So it's get, now notice you have get button, and these are for joysticks. And we're going to do the get key down, which is right here. Double click, get key down. Well, what key are we going to look at? We're going to look at the space key. So we have to send it a key code. If you look right here, I wrote get key down, and right here it says bool. That means it returns true. We're in the frame. If the user starts pressing down the key, it will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. So if the key has not been pressed, then it just will return false. So we're either saying if true or false. So in here, it's the key code of space. So key code dot space, like so. Now, what happens if the space is being pressed? I'm going to do a little thing here I do sometimes just to make it a little more obvious. Sometimes it's handy to put a little space around. Like I said, this is actually considered a method. It's something that we can do related to input, and it's either going to be true or false. Now, if it's true, spacebar is being pressed, what we want to do is add force. So that's m_rb dot add force. And in it, we're going to go ahead and give it a jump height. However, that's vertical. We need to start with horizontal. 0.0 F. Does it work? I think I might have to put down F. I might not. Yeah, I do. And then we're going to give it jump height. And then we're going to give it a 0.0 F again. And what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, so if the space is being pressed, it got rid of my spaces. We're going to add a vertical force. The first one is x, that's the horizontal force. Jump height is vertical, that is the y, and 0.0 is the forward backward. We're not adding any of that. Let's go ahead and save our changes and let's test it out in our game. So the first thing I want to do is click on the player, and one of the things you'll notice is their speed. Oh, there's another thing here. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Apparently, give me a moment while I load this up. It's kind of pausing. Give me just a second. Okay, here we go. Go ahead and jump. Now look, while I'm in the air, I can keep jumping. And let's just roll. As soon as I roll off, watch what can happen. As I'm falling, I can be jumping and kind of float in the air. Now, if you want to make a joust game, go for it. Do that. That'd be a good version of joust, right? And you have to hit flap to fly. And it would work. But that's not what we're making here. So we're not going to do it that way. I'm going to make it so that you can only jump when you are grounded. Now for that, it's going to take some serious work. So I'm going to do some serious editing here. So the first thing I do is in my project folder, I go to scripts, I get that open, and I want to open up my script, which is the player controller, double clicking it, getting it back in there, which I didn't have. I must have closed it. I was having some issues with the computer. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to add some more materials that we want to add. First thing we want to do is create a variable to track the collider. And so this is a collider object, and this will determine whether an object is colliding with another object. So we're going to call it mCollider. mCollider. We're not going to set its value in 10. We're going to do that in start. And then we're going to make a float. It's also going to be private. Float. This is going to be a collider radius, and I'll explain this in a moment. I'm going to set that to 0.0f. I'm going to have to set that in start. I'm not going to set it here, and I'll explain why also. I may actually have it wrong in my explanation, but the main part is that you get this stuff coded in. So, grounded epsilon. Grounded epsilon, we're going to set it to 0.05f. And we have one more, which is the layer platform. We're going to declare it. We're not going to set it just yet. We'll be setting it in a little bit, and I'll explain when, where, how, and why. Okay, so we have a collider now, a collider radius, grounded epsilon. In order for you to understand these three items here, actually, I'll just go ahead and explain all three of them. Okay, remember those terms. So first of all, let's click on our player. The player is a sphere. You will notice you've got these little handles here, so you can resize it. All right, but then you got this circle right there. That circle is in the center of the sphere, okay? And that center is called its origin. Its origin. And that is where, if we want to determine where an object is, we refer to its origin. Wherever that origin is, that's where the object is. Okay? You could just as easily set the origin down to the bottom of the sphere, but because it rolls around, it makes more sense to have it in the center of the sphere. So between the origin and the outer part of the sphere, that's a radius, no matter what surface of the sphere you are. Okay, keep that in mind. There's this epsilon. Let's go back to the epsilon. Okay, so we're going to set. I'll show you why the radius is set. We'll do it a little bit in a little bit. And then there's the grounded epsilon. Epsilon is just a fancy word for a very small value. Okay, and the idea of the small value is it has to do with whether we're grounded or not, right? Grounded meaning we're touching or colliding with a platform. Okay, so the grounded part is basically what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the distance from the origin to the edge of the sphere. That will be the radius. And then we're going to add just a little bit beyond it. And what we're going to do is do a thing called Raycast. And Raycast is going to determine if we're within a certain range of something. Okay? And what that range is how close are we to a platform? So are we the radius apart plus a little extra? Because if we just do the radius here, we need to extend into the other collider. Now for this to work, we have to have a collider on both the sphere and on the platform. And that's what the grounded epsilon is. It's just, the raycast is basically going to go from the origin and look just it's going to figure out how far do we want to look and in what direction. And then we're going to see, are we looking at another collider or not? If we are, that will return true. If not, it won't. So that's kind of the thinking behind all of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and start coding. First thing we need to do is we need to basically take this collider and find the object that is the collider. So I'm going to jump down here, and it's in Start. We already have a to-do list right here. We're going to connect to our collider. So that's M collider. And we're going to make it equal to get component. We're going to do just like we did with rigid body, only in this case, it's collider. So we're going to get the collider. And it's going to be the collider for our player object because this sprite is attached to the player. So when we want to get component, we just look to the component that is also attached to the player, which is this sphere collider. So when it says get component, it can only be one of these components that's already here. Components are the things that you add to your objects. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now we also need to get the radius. We're going to do that in Start. And so let's get the code for that. It is collider radius. Collider radius equals, and we're going to get the M collider dot bounds dot, is it bounds? Yeah, dot extents dot y. And what that means is, okay, so the collider, the bounds are like the boundary, right? And how far do we extend and in which direction? We're extending vertically from the collider. So basically we're saying how far away is the y, and it's always half the size of the bounds. I didn't know if you knew that. Extents, but half the size in the y direction. Okay, so we've done that, and we can take the to-do list off, but we can leave the comment there if you want. And then we're going to jump down. Now comes the interesting part. Okay, so like I said, for jumping mechanic, we need to check to see if the space bar is being pressed. We've done that, but we also need to check to see if we're touching the platform. And we don't have anything that will do that automatically for us, so we're going to write the code. So in this if, we're going to also add the and. It's a double ampersand. It's saying if both space is pressed and whatever the other thing is, and we're going to call it is grounded. And notice, is grounded is a method, all right? And this is very common. Anytime you have a method that will return a true or a false, is or has is a great way to start the name of it. So I'm going to check to see if it's grounded. Now, this is expecting to get a true or false value, because in an if check, you have to be able to check either a mathematical comparison or just to see if true or false is there. Okay, so we're still going to do the add force and all that, but now we need to add a method that will tell us if we're grounded or not. We're going to use the Raycast for that. So let's go ahead and write that in. Okay, so this particular one, I'm just going to write bool, and bool is basically the first thing you write in many methods is either void or a data type, in this case, bool. And this is going to be basically a method that's going to return a bool value, which is shorthand for Boolean. It's going to return a true or false. And we're just write is grounded. You want to make sure you spell it just like you have it up above. And then I'm going to hit enter and do my little curly brackets and hit enter again. And let's go ahead and code this dude out. Now, there's one interesting thing that's sort of beyond the scope of this video. It is really actually beyond my scope of explaining. We're going to set the platform layer here. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create this variable. This is only in grounded because we want to know what platform layer, where are we looking, okay? And we're going to use this in Raycast, and we're going to set equal to 1. We're going to do this thing called, it's an integer bitwise shift. It's going to shift bits. It's done in the binary level of the game. And so it's hard to explain how this works, but the main point here is we're going to create a variable and we're going to set it to this, which is basically we want to know what platform we're checking on, okay? And by the way, you notice how is grounded is red? You hover over it, it'll say bool, and it says player controller dot is grounded, not all code paths return a value. So if I were to just right here write return true like that, it would be happy because I'm returning a value that matches the data type here, which is bool. Okay, true does. I can also return false. And it likes that too. And I can even return, for example, 5 is less than 10. And 5 is less than 10, so that would return a true. And if I wanted to do 5 is greater than 10, it would return a false. Instead, we're not going to return this value. We're going to return, basically, we're going to use a physics method called Raycast, which will return which will basically give us a true or false, and we'll send that to our if check above. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. We're going to give it basically, Raycast is part of the physics library. There's a whole library filled with different things we can do with physics. In this case, it's Raycast. So physics.raycast. All right. Now in Raycast, you can see there's 16 different ways we can call Raycast. Either way, they all return a bool. I believe it's number 4 is what we're going to do. And so we're going to send it basically 4 values. We're looking for one that shows us 4 values. Is it 4? Well, I forget which one it's going to be. So don't worry about that. I'm going to just do this return Raycast. I'm going to hit enter, and this is where I'm going to type it out. The first thing we're going to do is get the position. So we want to know the position of our object's origin, and that's transform.position. That is, where is the origin of my sphere currently? So that, in this case, let's take a look here. Where this little dot is, that's the origin right now. And when it's down at the bottom, it will be closer to the platform. And in fact, it will be the radius of the object away from the platform. Okay, that's transform position. We need to know where we are. That's actually this one that said vector 3 transform. I forget where I just saw it for a second there. And it basically the current position. So then what we want to do is we want to know what direction are we looking. So we're going to look down. So we're going to do vector 3 down. It's pretty awesome that you have that there. All right, so we're going to take the position. We're going to look down. How far down are we going to look to see if there's an object there? We're going to look down the radius of the collider plus that grounded epsilon. Did I mention that the epsilon means basically a very small value? Collider radius. Collider radius plus we want to add that grounded epsilon. And then finally, the last thing we're going to give it is the platform layer. Okay. And with all this, it was the 9th implementation of this where we're sending it array and the maximum distance we want to look in what direction. Actually, I don't think that was actually the one. But anyway, that tells you kind of what we're doing there. Now, there's one other thing we need to do. By the way, like I said, it's going to return true or false. We're going to say, is there a platform layer that is basically below the origin that's basically the radius of the origin plus a little bit. So we look just a little past the outer side of that by 0.05. If it's that close to the platform, this whole thing returns a true, which allows us to jump. Let's save our changes, and let's go back to Unity, and there's another little piece we need to do. On our platforms, and you can look on any platform here, you go into Unity, take a look at each one. So I click on the platform, and notice the layer is platform layer 8. So we go over to the player, and we look at user layer platform. Right now it's set to 0, so we're just going to set it right in here. We type 8. Now the key for this to work, there's some pieces that have to be in place. Number 1, you obviously have to have a sphere collider. You should. It came with it. Number 2, you're going to have to set the user platform 8. You have to set it there. And number 3, you want to look at your platforms and make sure all of them are on layer 8 platform layer. Now, we actually did that as a prefab, so we'll take a look at the platform and the prefab, and as long as that's on the platform, all the rest should be as well. Let's go ahead and test this out and see if it works. And the goal here is, can we jump in space? No, we can't. So everything's working now. Except for we can also turn in the air, and nothing's moving yet. By the way, if you go here, you can't jump out of here. That's because, remember, we're looking down, and there's nothing down below it. Okay. By the way, did you like my new skybox? I thought you might. Anyway, so there's our code. Let me give you one last look at the full code. So I'm going to leave you with this code, which is basically the full code from the player controller down to the bottom. And on the left are the new variables we created over here. And here's what we did in start. And then fixed update is on the right. All right, so you can just get a general idea as to the changes that we made. And so you might want to take a look at that or rewatch the video. So stay tuned for the next video. We are going to add some objects we can pick up along the way to make it more interesting. So stay tuned for that video. Thank you so much for watching. And before you go, if you are working on Git, now's a great time to commit. Commit to Git. All right, and so you want to make sure you do all of that. So make sure you do that. All right, so stay tuned for my next video, and I will talk to you later. Thank you for watching. Bye.